Hey guys, tonight we drift away from your usual bedtime routine and take you far across the ancient landscapes of Ethiopia. Imagine the sun dipping low behind jagged highlands, the sky bleeding orange as a dry wind dances over cracked stone. You're not in your bed anymore, you're trudging through sacred dust, centuries old, toward a monastery where they don't speak much but sure know how to ward off nightmares. They do it with scrolls. Not ordinary ones. These are scrolls soaked in symbols, whispering in ink, designed not just to be read, but to protect. You're about to find out how monks, yes, actual monks, dedicated their lives to decorating goat-hide scrolls to keep your subconscious in check. But, quick reality check, this isn't the kind of dream defense you can 2 days ship to your door. The stuff you're about to see takes weeks to make, smells like smoke and herbs, and sometimes includes powdered animal bones. You probably won't survive this as a modern person unless you've already deleted your Wi-Fi and started growing your own barley. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your current local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly now, each step crunching over gravel. You're headed toward a low ridge, the sky deepening, stars beginning to peek out. The locals warned you, don't travel alone at night. Not here. This land, they say, has too many stories. You weren't sure what they meant until you passed a dry tree split open like a ribcage. Beneath it, a thin scrap of parchment, rolled tight and tied with a red thread. The writing is in Guizi, the ancient liturgical language still used in Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. You can't read it, not really, but the script curls like snakes. It looks like it's waiting. In your pack, there's a small clay bottle with holy water, just in case. The locals insisted. They also said if you feel anything tugging at your feet while you sleep, don't open your eyes. It's never good to look directly at what's visiting. Finally, through the haze of dry dust and acacia trees, you see it, a sandstone wall rising like a golden mirage. A monastery carved into the cliff itself. No front gates. Just a zigzagging path that disappears around sharp corners. You feel watched. You don't knock. That's not how it works here. A monk appears, bare feet, white robes, head shaved, eyes half closed like he's been dozing in prayer. He nods without speaking in turns. You follow. Inside, the air cools instantly. It smells like old beeswax and something faintly herbal, frankincense, maybe. The corridor narrows. You have to duck. It twists like a burrow through rock, and small alcoves glow with candlelight. You pass one alcove and catch a glimpse, rows of old parchment scrolls wrapped in cloth, stored vertically like rolled-up dreams. A soft hum echoes from deeper within. Chanting. You can't make out words, only tone. Low and steady. It's the kind of sound that wraps around your ribs and makes your heartbeat slow. You realize you're breathing quieter. The monk leads you to a small stone cell where another figure waits. He's older, with a parchment-colored face and hands that look permanently ink-stained. Before either of you speak, he gently places a long scroll on the table between you. It's no longer than your forearm, rolled tight, wrapped in soft leather. You reach out, slowly. The scroll is warm. You hadn't expected that. Like it's been sitting under the sun, or near a fire, or breathing. The monk finally speaks, his voice as raspy as a candle's hiss. This one protects dreams. You unroll it with care. The parchment is thick and yellowed, still slightly translucent at the edges. Symbols spiral down its length. Not in straight lines, no. These symbols dance in loops, sometimes crowding toward the edges, then suddenly opening into empty space, like a clearing in a forest. There are figures too, some with wings, others with staffs, some with what appear to be halos of fire. Their eyes are always round. Always watching. Sleep is not safe, the monk says. You dream too close to the veil. And there it is. That's what you've come to understand. For these monks, sleep is not just rest. It's a crossing. A nightly brush with other realms. To them, decorating these scrolls is not artistic, it's functional. Like a spiritual firewall, if your firewalls were made of goat skin and spells. One scroll for each sleeper. Custom made. The ink, the symbols, the protective prayers, crafted according to the sleeper's unique fears. One monk once described it as tailoring armor for your dreams. Which sounds poetic, until you remember, armor is only needed when something's out to get you. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were meant more as medical tools, spiritual aids, or just ceremonial traditions. But the monks don't care much for debates. They care that the scroll works. That the sleeper wakes up. One odd thing you notice, at the very bottom of this scroll is a small, almost cartoonish drawing of a lion. It's wearing a crown. You glance up, puzzled. The older monk shrugs. Sometimes the scroll dreams too. Right. You sit with that a while. The room flickers with candlelight. Outside, the wind kicks up again, sending dust through the narrow window slits. Somewhere far below, a hyena calls out, its laugh rising, falling, then gone. You lean back against the wall. The stone is cool. You close your eyes. Just for a moment. And in the dark, the scroll hums softly. The stone beneath you presses a gridwork of chill into your back, but the candlelight hasn't changed. It's still flickering in the same rhythm, like it never noticed you drifted off. The monk is gone, but the scroll remains, still unrolled, still warm, still whispering something your waking mind can't hold on to. You sit up, your body creaking like a wooden step. The hum of chanting is louder now, resonating through the corridors like water running through an old pipe. As you move back into the hall, guided only by the flickering nubs of beeswax, you realize something strange, your own footsteps don't echo. The stone swallows them. You climb. The path curves tighter, hugging the cliff's inner walls, until you emerge into a vaulted space lit entirely by oil lamps hung from beams carved directly into the rock. You've reached the heart of the monastery. The scriptorium. And yes, it smells like centuries. Old leather, dried herbs, ink cooked from soot and wine. Scrolls lie unfurled across low wooden tables, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of elbows and prayer. Along the far wall, a row of monks sits hunched, their faces just inches from parchment, brushing deliberate lines with brushes made of dried reeds. You've never seen a room so silent and so alive at the same time. One of the younger monks nods to you and gestures to an empty bench. A fresh sheet of parchment lies waiting, stretched taut and pinned with small stones. You sit. And then the real mystery begins, because what you expected to be mystical turns out, at first, to be utterly technical. There are rules. Steps. An order to the scroll's creation, as rigorous as any architectural blueprint. First comes the parchment, almost always made from goat skin. It's chosen for its toughness and slight stretch, which monks say makes it willing to hold dreams. The skin is scraped and soaked in water infused with crushed leaves, scented with eucalyptus or thyme. It's then stretched over a wooden frame and dried flat under the sun, bleached with salt water if it needs to brighten. Next is the ink. This is not something squeezed from a pen cartridge. The ink here is brewed. 1 part soot, 1 part gum arabic, mixed with water and something called cake, a dark resin harvested from tree bark that smells like scorched earth. For red ink, they'll add powdered cinnabar or even crushed beetle shells, yes, actual beetles. You try not to look too closely at the mortar where it's all being mashed together. And then there are the brushes. You expected something elegant. Instead, the brush handed to you looks like a bundle of wiry horsehair tied to a stick. But when you watch the monk beside you dip it in ink and drag it across the parchment, the result is a line as smooth as silk and precise as an ECG readout. You're handed a tiny ceramic cup of the same black ink and told to begin. Begin what? You'll draw your fear, the monk says softly. You laugh. Of course. Because that's not terrifying at all. But you try. Your hand trembles as you paint a single crooked line, then a second. You think maybe it's a snake. Or maybe a road. You're not sure. But you continue. And as you paint, the line begins to pull other lines from you, as if it's not you doing the guiding at all. The monk nods like he's seen this before. He probably has. Across the table, another monk is painting a figure, a woman with a halo made of thorns. Beside her, a demon cowers in a cage made entirely of interlocking crosses. The woman doesn't smile. Her eyes are heavy-lidded, like yours felt when you first arrived. Historians still argue whether these early scrolls were purely religious, or something more intimate, psychospiritual therapy, maybe. But the monks didn't use terms like cognitive distortion or lucid dreaming. They had their own lexicon, and it wasn't built for academia. It was built for silence, and for sleep. One monk tells you that the best scrolls are those that confuse the demons. A scroll should be so intricate, so dense with symbols and circular prayers, that whatever finds you in your sleep can't navigate its way out. A trap. You dip your brush again, painting tighter this time. Circles within circles. Eyes inside stars. You don't even know what the symbols mean. But they mean something to your hand, and that seems to be enough. In the corner of the scriptorium, a monk hangs completed scrolls on a line to dry, like laundry. They sway gently. Some are barely wider than a ruler. Others stretch as long as a man's height. Most are meant to be rolled and hidden, under beds, in sleeves, in pillows, but some are displayed proudly, offered to the community for protection. There's a scroll with nothing but inked footprints, arranged in spirals. Another shows a lion riding a fish. Another bears a single word repeated 1,000 times in red ink, Tebarek. Blessed. And then you see one that stops you entirely. It's simple, just a single figure, seated cross-legged, surrounded by tangled vines. No demons. No angels. Just a sleeping man, eyes closed. You ask the monk what it means. He shrugs. He never woke up. So we honored the sleep. That night, you sleep in the same chamber where the scrolls dry. The wind has stilled, but your dreams are anything but quiet. They tangle. They twist. You wake once, gasping, certain something was watching. But the scroll beside you glows faintly in the dark, as if it's doing exactly what it was made to do. And you sleep again. Morning in the highlands doesn't exactly ease you in. There's no soft alarm or smell of coffee, just sunlight stabbing through narrow slits in the rock, and the sound of distant chanting bouncing like marbles down stone corridors. You rise slowly, shoulders stiff, tongue dry, and eyes, oddly, rested. Your scroll, now rolled up tight and tied with a strip of fraying red linen, sits where you left it. It no longer hums. Instead, it feels still. Like it completed a task and is waiting for new orders. The monk from yesterday reappears, wordless, and motions for you to follow. You descend through tighter, dustier tunnels this time, deeper into the belly of the cliff. Your guide ducks through a final arch, and suddenly you're in a smaller, far older chamber. This scriptorium is different. Fewer scrolls, more relics. The air smells faintly sour, like dried milk and resin. In the center, a low table sits under a shaft of natural light that cuts down from an opening in the rock far above. On the table, parchment stretched tight, a thick brush resting atop it, and small ceramic bowls filled with pigment. These are no ordinary pigments. The monk gently lifts the edge of one scroll and points. This one made from wild goat. You peer closer. The parchment is creamy, slightly translucent, but tough. The ink isn't just black, it shimmers slightly in the sunlight, thanks to a powder of ground bark and burned clay mixed with plant resin. You wonder if it's safe to touch. Then you wonder why you're thinking like a museum visitor when you're clearly in the middle of a dream, or a memory. The older monk finally speaks. To protect a sleeper, the scroll must breathe. It cannot be stiff. It must move with the body. You nod, slowly. Of course it must. They show you the process. The goats used for scrolls aren't just chosen for convenience. In fact, scroll parchment is often made only from the skin of specific young goats, those born during certain moons, in specific villages, and raised without blemish or injury. Why? Because they're believed to carry less spiritual residue. Yes, you heard that right, less baggage. If your scroll is made from a goat who once got kicked by a camel or had a panic attack near a hyena, its energy might be disturbed. Historians still argue whether this reflects ancient superstition or a clever way to maintain consistent parchment quality. But here, no one's arguing. They're just carefully scraping the hide with curved blades until it's thin enough to stretch tight over wooden frames. And they stretch it with weight, literally stones tied to string, slowly pulling the corners outward like a drumhead. The frames sit near fires or under angled beams of morning light, depending on the monk's personal preference. Some say fire brings strength. Others prefer the sun's patience. Once dry, the parchment is rubbed with river sand to smooth it. The result? A buttery, almost rubbery surface that seems to invite ink like it's thirsty for meaning. You watch as a new scroll is begun. The monk dips his brush, this one made from porcupine bristle, into a dish of ink blackened with pine soot. He begins drawing lines. But they aren't lines. They're curves. Spirals. Shapes that pulse with rhythm, like the steady beat of a drum beneath skin. He's not writing words yet. He's inviting the spirit, he says. The scroll must feel alive before it can be asked to carry protection. No pressure. The symbols come next. Not letters exactly. These are forms from Guizi script, modified, exaggerated, reversed. A single letter might be drawn 4 or 5 times in a swirling pattern to confuse spirits or lull the dreamer into deeper unconsciousness. There's no universal grammar here. It's part writing, part drawing, part whisper. That's the word one monk uses, he says, the scroll must whisper even when the dreamer does not. And some of them really do look like whispers. Faint grayish marks made with ink diluted to a silvery wash, trailing off at the corners, as if they're vanishing mid-breath. Then come the drawings. You expected something more medieval. But these aren't timid halos and stiff icons. They're bold, surreal, and strangely intimate. Take the wide-eyed angel. You first saw it yesterday, and now it's everywhere, in margins, in borders, sometimes peeking from behind lines of script. These angels don't float. They perch. They lean. They crouch beside sleeping figures, often with enormous eyes that look directly outward, straight at the reader, or the dream. Some historians believe the exaggerated eyes were a deliberate tactic to keep watch during sleep. Others suggest the style evolved simply because monks painted in candlelight, and larger eyes were easier to render. Regardless, there's something uncanny about it. The eyes are rarely symmetrical. They bulge slightly, as if aware. You get the feeling these angels don't protect so much as monitor. And then there's the architecture. Yes, there are buildings drawn into some scrolls, blocky little churches with cross-shaped windows and steps too steep to climb. Sometimes they float above sleeping figures. Sometimes they sink into clouds. You wonder if they're meant to represent heaven, or dreams, or both. One particularly ornate scroll shows a monastery like the one you're in, surrounded by a ring of lions, each with its mouth open wide, filled not with teeth, but with words, actual words painted in tiny red script. Protective verses meant to roar the sleeper awake if needed. The monk catches you staring and smiles. Lions are better than bells. You don't disagree. The day passes in near silence, broken only by soft chanting and the scratch of brushes. You don't notice hunger. Or thirst. Only the rising wind outside, and the strange peace in watching something so old still being made by hand, for reasons that don't fit neatly into modern boxes. These aren't art objects. They're tools. Armor. Lullabies. As the sun fades, the older monk wraps a completed scroll in soft cloth, ties it with a length of dyed sheep's wool, and places it into a carved wooden box. On its lid, a sleeping face. You ask if it's meant to be symbolic. He just shrugs. That one's for someone who stopped dreaming. We hope it brings them back. You don't ask how long ago that was. You lie awake that night, staring at the ceiling of your small stone cell. Your scroll lies beside you. And still, its silence hums. You wake up with the vague sense that something was standing near you. Not touching, not whispering, just watching. The kind of presence that doesn't leave footprints, but rearranges your sense of space. Your scroll sits beside you, right where you left it, but now it's open slightly, as though a breeze lifted one corner and then let it fall again. You look around. Nothing. But you don't feel alone. Today, you're led up a steep stairway carved directly into the rock, each step uneven, worn down by centuries of sandals and bare feet. At the top, a sliver of sunlight spills into a high alcove, and this time, the monk doesn't gesture for you to sit. He simply points at the wall. You move closer and see it, an enormous scroll, taller than a man, fixed behind glass. Its surface is worn, faded in parts, but what remains is astonishing, a kaleidoscope of symbols, winding lines, painted figures, and faces that all seem to share one thing in common. The eyes. Wide. Round. Centered. These eyes are not gentle. They are not decorative. They look at you with something between accusation and pity. They are guardians, the monk says. You turn. Of the dreams? He nods. But also of the scroll itself. You lean closer, inspecting the craftsmanship. These aren't stick figures. Each guardian is detailed, robes flowing in rigid lines, hands raised in blessing or warning, and halos painted with concentric circles of gold and soot-black ink. Each one faces outward. None of them turn inward, toward the scroll's text. Because, as the monk explains, the dream itself doesn't need watching. You do. These guardians are known as Einat Saihaf, or the eyes of the text. Their presence isn't passive. According to tradition, once the scroll is blessed and given to its owner, the guardians on it become active. Some monks say the scroll must learn its sleeper, that it adapts, slowly, to the rhythm of the person's breath, the tension in their body, and the weight of their fears. You're skeptical. Until you realize the scroll you've been sleeping with doesn't hum anymore. It sighs. That night, you'll swear you hear it matching your exhale. But you're getting ahead of yourself. You return to the main scriptorium to examine more figures. One scroll features an angel mid-flight, wings twisted into patterns that resemble bird feathers, but also vines. Spirals. It's hard to tell. The monk beside you confirms what you're already beginning to understand. There is no standardized design. Each scroll is personal. Hand-painted based on a mixture of dreams, symptoms, omens, and intuition. If you complain of night terrors, the monk may add extra rows of tserat, small crosses in tight formation, drawn like a fence. If you fear being followed, the scroll may feature saints who run, turn, or wield staffs that glow. One particularly dramatic scroll shows a figure, possibly Saint George, impaling a dark, dog-like shape with glowing eyes. But the strange part is the writing above it. It says, loosely translated, "He who wrestled his sleep and won." You raise an eyebrow. The monk smiles. Some dreams need weapons. And that's when you understand that these monks weren't just artists. They were dream tacticians. Their brushstrokes weren't decorative, they were defensive. Scrolls weren't passive items, they were strategic defenses tailored to each sleeper's needs. Historians still argue whether this was a psychological treatment disguised as religion, or if it really was about battling unseen forces in the dark. But again, here, there's no debate. A scroll works if the dreamer sleeps. You're shown another section of the monastery where worn scrolls are retired. Some are buried in the floor beneath prayer chambers. Others are burned ceremonially, the ash collected in small clay pots. You're told one pot is placed at the head of a woman's bed who hasn't dreamed in years. She keeps it on a shelf, just in case the scroll's memory still lingers. You imagine that shelf. A tiny jar of dreams. Among the newer scrolls, you find a style that's curiously minimal. Fewer drawings, mostly just lines of repeated script, a single phrase looped over and over until it curls into itself, forming a whirlpool of language. It looks hypnotic. You lean closer. The phrase? Rest without watchers. A monk explains that this was a style used only for those who feared being watched, not by spirits, but by people. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. For these sleepers, the threat wasn't supernatural, it was emotional. Sometimes, it was memory. A relative. A betrayal. A secret. This scroll, then, becomes a silence. A refuge. A night without eyes. Even in dreams. You pause, thinking about your own scroll. About its shapes, its eyes, its steady rhythm. You wonder what it sees when you're unconscious. And more unnervingly, you wonder what it's choosing not to tell you. The monk hands you a final scroll to examine. It's old, worn, almost translucent. Barely legible. But at the very bottom, you see a line scrawled in what looks like a rush of ink, as though it were written in haste. Remember, not all eyes protect. Some just stare. You fold the scroll gently. The monk doesn't stop you. That night, you dream of standing in a field of scrolls, each one unrolling at your feet, each revealing a single painted eye, watching you as you walk. You don't run. You don't wake. You just keep walking. That is, your lips are moving. You were speaking, softly, something not quite language. The moment you open your eyes, it vanishes, like breath against glass. The scroll beside you lies unrolled now, even though you're certain you left it tied. Its symbols stare up at you like a forgotten thought trying to claw its way back into consciousness. You lie there a while, watching the morning light gather in corners. The monastery is quiet again, as if the night was a long exhale. You stretch, gather your things, and follow the stone corridor deeper into the mountain. Today, they say, you'll see a breathing scroll. You're not sure what that means. The monk guiding you carries a lamp and a bundle under one arm, wrapped in old linen. He walks silently, barefoot, leading you down a series of damp steps until the walls begin to curve, no longer hewn stone, but natural cavern. It's cooler here. Earthier. You hear dripping water in the distance. And then, you arrive. The chamber is small, circular, filled with a golden glow. In the center is a pedestal, and on it rests one of the most unusual scrolls you've seen. Unlike the others, it's not tightly bound or sealed in a box. It's laid out like a ribbon, stretched across a thin frame made of braided reed and copper. The linen bundle the monk carried. He unwraps it and reveals something like a bellows, yes, a literal breathing tool, fashioned from goat hide and reed stalks. He presses it gently beneath the scroll. It expands. Contracts. Once. Twice. And then, something incredible happens. The scroll moves. The parchment rises and falls ever so slightly, as if responding to breath. Its surface ripples like skin reacting to cold. And though the ink doesn't shift, your eyes play tricks on you, figures seem to sway, symbols blur at the edges. You lean in, squinting. It's not mechanical. There are no gears. No wires. The only thing making it move is breath, air pushed gently from the bellows, rising through the hollow reed supports beneath the frame. But the effect is hypnotic. The monk says softly, some scrolls must mimic the sleeper. To shield the dream, they must dream too. You can't stop staring. Each inhalation makes the painted saints swell ever so slightly, as if bracing themselves. Each exhale releases them into a momentary calm. This is not just decoration. It's a tool. Some believe scrolls like this were used by monks too plagued by visions to sleep alone. The breathing mechanism soothed them, kept them company. Perhaps it even tricked their minds into thinking someone else was near. Some scholars have argued that this technique mimics early biofeedback, calming the body through rhythm. But not everyone agrees. Historians still argue whether these devices were therapeutic aids or symbolic rituals, part of a long tradition of ritual sleep practices found across East African highlands. You ask if the scrolls ever failed. The monk hesitates. He tells you a story. There was once a novice monk, young, deeply devout, but plagued with visions so intense they left scratch marks on his own arms. His scroll was made carefully, over 3 weeks, with extra saints and a double ring of crosses. It breathed beside him every night. But one morning, the other monks found his bed empty. The scroll was intact. Unburned. His sandals still at the doorway. But the boy was gone. Some say he left in the night. Others say something else left with him. There's no moral to the story. Just an empty bed, and a scroll that still breathes. You step closer to this breathing scroll, tracing its figures with your eyes. One saint bears a sword that curves not toward demons, but inward, toward her own heart. Another figure has no face, just a single eye in the center of its chest. You ask what it means. The monk only says, sometimes the dream must look back. And that lingers with you. You start to notice this theme recurring in other scrolls now. Figures looking inward. Angels curled into themselves. Symbols spiraling both forward and backward, like time rewinding. You realize these scrolls aren't just for defense, they're mirrors. Sometimes uncomfortable ones. Some scrolls are even designed to change over time. Monks might return to them and add lines, repaint symbols, reinforce blessings. They grow alongside the sleeper's fears, hopes, and confessions. One particularly large scroll has 27 dates scribbled along the bottom, tracking every update since its creation. Its figures evolve, some gain halos, others disappear entirely. The monk calls it a walked scroll, because it travels alongside a life. You wonder how long yours would take to finish. That night, you sleep with your scroll near your head, instead of at your side. Just an inch or two closer. And something shifts. The dreams come in color now, bright, vivid, laced with sound. You hear chanting in the background, but also birdsong, distant drums, a woman's laughter. You walk through fields that stretch impossibly wide, filled with symbols that float in the air like petals. You turn around. And behind you walks a figure that looks exactly like you, except it's painted. Eyes round. Mouth closed. Watching. You wake with the image still in your head. Not frightened. Just observed. You eat breakfast in silence, flatbread with honey, a small cup of barley milk, and the scroll beside you stays rolled and calm, almost as if it's resting too. You don't speak to the monks. They don't speak to you. Not out of rudeness, but because you've all quietly agreed that silence explains things better. Today's walk is long, through a passage that twists toward the cliff's outer wall. You pass faded frescoes, alcoves filled with old jars, and the occasional candle still burning even though the daylight spills in thick, warm, and golden. At last, you enter a low-ceilinged room that feels older than the others. Colder, too. And here, the scrolls are different. They're dramatic. Chaotic. Saints with wild eyes. fire everywhere. Crosses drawn with such speed and repetition they look almost angry. And amid all this chaos, figures wrestling with twisted creatures. Thin-limbed demons. Shadowed snakes. Men with dog heads. Dream battles, the monk beside you whispers. You sit beside one scroll, tracing the lines of a painted man gripping the throat of a smoky black shape with too many fingers. The monk kneels beside you, brushing dust gently from the parchment. In our tradition, he says slowly, to copy a saint's struggle is to invoke it. To paint their victory is to borrow their strength. These scenes aren't just stories, they're weapons. Monks believe that by painting specific saintly confrontations, Saint Tekle Haymanot with his 6 wings, or Saint Gevre Menphy's Kytus covered in lion's hair, the dreamer could mirror that victory in their own nightmares. Sort of like mental rehearsal, but with divine backup. You chuckle softly. So it's spiritual fan fiction. The monk doesn't smile, but you think he wants to. Some scrolls feature repeating combat scenes like a medieval comic strip. One moment, the saint prays. The next, he's swinging a staff. Then the demon is crumbling into ash, or in one strange instance, laughing, as if the battle isn't over at all. Historians still argue whether these repetitive motifs were literal beliefs or metaphorical encouragements, stay strong messages embedded in centuries-old narrative loops. But for the monks who painted them, it wasn't theory. They believed in a knightly war, and these scrolls were their shields. One scroll you're handed is curiously small. Only the size of a forearm, it unrolls to reveal a single saint holding up a hand. That's it. Just one gesture. A raised palm. The monk explains that this symbol alone was believed powerful enough to halt dark breath, a phrase used to describe sleep paralysis and night terrors. To raise the hand, he says, is to block the path. You think about that. Blocking the path. You realize how many of your own dreams involve escape, running, hiding, sliding through closing doors. You've never thought to raise your hand. This night, you try it. You dream of a long hallway, stone, cold, damp. Something follows. You walk faster, but the door at the end won't open. And then you remember. You stop. You raise your hand. Everything freezes. You wake in silence. Your arm is still raised. And the scroll lies open beside you, its single painted figure mirroring your motion, palm up. Some part of you wonders if that's coincidence. But most of you knows better by now. You begin to notice more in these battle scrolls. Details that don't quite fit. Saints who seem tired. Demons who seem mournful. In one scroll, the same saint fights 3 creatures, but the third wears his face. You ask the monk about it. Sometimes, he says, the real demon is memory. Ah. There it is. Because not all battles are external. Not all pain is supernatural. Sometimes, these scrolls reflect inner trauma, loss, guilt, betrayal. And rather than naming it, the monks wrapped it in metaphor. If your pain was a snake, it could be stabbed. If your fear was a shadow, it could be chased away by a painted torch. You understand now why some scrolls feel frantic, cluttered, desperate. They weren't made calmly. They were made in crisis. One monk shows you a scroll that was painted in a single night. Its lines are jagged. The ink bled. The figures look startled, unfinished. But at the bottom, scrawled in red, I made this because the light would not return. No date. No signature. Just that. The air around the scroll feels heavier. Some scrolls were never meant to last. They were meant to survive one night, just long enough to carry a sleeper through the worst of it. And in the morning, they might be burned. Buried. Forgotten. But the memory clings, like soot. You're handed another scroll, this one older, flaking, but still vivid in one area. A saint holding a lantern, surrounded by snakes. Not fighting them. just standing in their center, light raised. You ask the monk what it means. He answers simply, some fears don't flee. You just keep the light on. Later, you're shown a box. Inside, dozens of tiny parchment scraps, no bigger than a finger. Each one has a single word, peace. Wake. Guard. Light. These were slipped under pillows, into pockets, tied into braids. Micro-scrolls. Panic scrolls. And you begin to think, this entire tradition, these thousands of scrolls, these generations of monks, is one long act of kindness. A centuries-old refusal to let fear take the night unchallenged. Tonight, your scroll hums again. But differently now. Not like breath. More like a heartbeat. You rest your head near it, not touching. You don't dream of battles this time. You dream of watching someone else sleep, safe and still, the scroll resting like a curled cat beside them, blinking slowly. You wake up with the distinct feeling that you were being chased, and then forgiven. That doesn't make sense, but dreams rarely do. You lie still, heartbeat slowing, and slowly unwrap your scroll from the cloth it's been resting in. The painted figures seem calmer today, their wide eyes less accusing. There's something softer in the lines, as if the brush strokes themselves adjusted to your new rhythm. The monk finds you before you've dressed and gestures for you to follow him to a new chamber. This one is darker than the others, almost entirely windowless, lit by rows of flickering lamps placed low to the ground. And here, the scrolls look different again. They are louder. Not in volume, of course, but in color. Scrolls inked entirely in red, bright, ferocious, wild. There are no angels in these scrolls. No comforting saints. Just symbols repeated over and over in slashing lines, some illegible, some curled like flames. These, the monk says, are scrolls of cursing. You blink. You mean, like, curses? As in revenge? He nods. Sometimes, bad dreams are not accidents. Sometimes they are sent. Well then. That escalated quickly. According to tradition, the same monks who painted blessings also knew how to paint the reverse. These scrolls weren't made to protect, they were made to deflect. To push back. To return spiritual harm to its source. Usually written in red ink, these curses weren't just fiery in appearance. They were packed with dense incantations, looping traps, and symbols drawn in near-illegible layers to confuse hostile spirits. You examine one more closely. The writing is almost too small to read, as if it were meant for eyes other than yours. At the bottom, a strange design, a spiraled eye surrounded by crosses, all enclosed in what looks like thorns. That, says the monk, is to confuse Jean. He says the name like it should mean something. And indeed, it does. The Jinn is one of the oldest dream demons in Ethiopian folklore. Described as a shadowy figure that crawls onto your chest while you sleep, paralyzing your limbs and whispering doubts into your ear, Jinn is widely blamed for what we'd now call sleep paralysis. Monks, of course, had their own methods of defense. This scroll, for instance, is filled with dozens of tiny crosses, each one enclosing the word Melkam, good. The theory was simple: if the Jinn tried to enter your dreams, it would have to pass through every single good word. And with each repetition, it would weaken. Like an exorcism by exhaustion. Some monks went even further, embedding red ink curses meant not only to block, but to punish. One scroll you examine includes this line, written in a ragged circle. May the night that swallows me choke on the light I carry. Yikes. Historians still argue whether these curse scrolls were meant as literal spiritual tools or psychological mechanisms, catharsis by calligraphy. But either way, they served a function. They let people fight back. People who felt helpless during the day could find power in ink and parchment at night. You spot another scroll made entirely of triangles. Inside each triangle, a word. Some are blessings. Others are not. The monk leans in and explains that this is a trap scroll. The shapes are meant to capture energy, hold it, bind it. And in the center of the scroll, a tiny image of Jean, drawn so faintly it almost disappears unless the light hits it just right. It's facing away. You shiver. But not all curses were directed at spirits. Some were personal. You're shown one scroll commissioned by a grieving mother. The lines are shaky, the symbols almost hesitant. But at the center, written over and over in red. Return my child or forget peace. You ask if it worked. The monk doesn't answer. Some scrolls are intentionally left incomplete. You find one with 4 columns of tightly packed text, and then, nothing. Just blank parchment. You ask if it was abandoned. The monk shakes his head. It's waiting, he says. For the final word. You wonder how many people live with incomplete stories, blank endings waiting to be filled. And then there's the silent scroll. It's almost entirely empty, just one word in the middle, written in gold ink. La la la, hush. No saints. No demons. Just a single command to the dream, quiet. You carry that one in your mind for the rest of the day. That night, before sleep, the monk brings you your own red ink scroll. Not a curse, he assures you. A shield. Meant for when Jean tries to return. It's smaller than the others, but heavier somehow. You unroll it and find a pattern of 14 circles, each enclosing the same phrase. You may knock, but I do not open. You don't know whether to be amused or moved. But you place the scroll near your chest as you lie down. The dreams come slowly. At first, you're walking through clouds shaped like crosses. Then you're in a room made entirely of doors, none of which open. And somewhere behind one of them, something knocks. Once. Twice. You don't move. You don't answer. You wake with a sense of strength, like a door held firm through a storm. This morning, when you open your eyes, the scroll is gone. You sit up quickly, heart skipping, scanning your small chamber. Nothing. The folded cloth is there. Your sandals, your blanket, your breath. But the red ink scroll that guarded your chest last night vanished. Before panic sets in, there's a soft knock at the door. A younger monk appears, nods politely, and simply hands you something bundled in darker cloth than before. He doesn't explain, doesn't linger. You wait until he disappears into the corridor before you unfold it. Your scroll. But it's changed. The ink hasn't moved, exactly, but there are new shapes around the edges. Ghost lines. Like someone added layers while you slept. It's the same words, same protective circles, but now, faint outlines of birds drift between the text. Swallows, maybe. Doves. They fly between the phrases as though released from inside them. You stare at it, and for a brief moment, you swear you hear a flutter. Later that morning, you bring the scroll to the older monk. He doesn't seem surprised. Sometimes, he says softly, the scroll listens. And answers. You don't press him. Not because you're afraid of what he might say, but because you're afraid you'll believe it too easily. He gestures for you to follow again. This time to the western wing of the monastery, a section carved into the outermost rock wall, open to the dry air and full of sunlight. Here, the scrolls are displayed differently. They aren't rolled. They aren't even tucked into frames. They hang, tall, suspended, backlit by sunlight like stained glass. You walk among them slowly, each one swaying in the faint breeze. And these scrolls, they are playful. Yes, playful. One has dancing saints, actual repeated images of a figure mid-leap, robes caught in motion. Another has rows of animals marching 2 by 2 across hills, like a bedtime parade. You spot lions, antelope, monkeys. And in one corner, possibly, what looks like a hyena wearing a hat. You laugh. Out loud. The monk doesn't scold you. These, he says, were painted for joy. Wait, joy. After all the curses and battles and doors that don't open. Yes. Joy. Some scrolls weren't made to block nightmares or chase demons. Some were painted to call good dreams toward the sleeper. To coax light, laughter, calm. A kind of invitation scroll, welcoming in visions that heal. One such scroll you pass is filled with musical instruments. Lutes, drums, flutes. A figure sleeps in the center, surrounded by painted sound. And somehow, even without movement, it hums in your memory. You ask how the monks chose what dream to invite. He shrugs. Depends on the dreamer. Some wanted to hear lost voices. Some wanted to fly. Some just wanted to laugh again. You step closer to another scroll and see what looks like children dancing, but with wings, tiny cherub-like figures with wild, delighted expressions. The script beneath them simply reads, "Let the heart remember how to skip." You wonder how long it's been since yours did. Historians still argue whether these joy scrolls were used as psychological comfort for the ill or the elderly, or as tools for teaching children to find courage in sleep. But the monks claim it doesn't matter why they work, just that they do. Another scroll shows a sleeping woman floating above her bed, held aloft by cloud-shaped words. You lean in and read, "Rest is not escape. It is arrival." There's something deeply soothing about that. Sleep not as fleeing the day, but as arriving somewhere better. Somewhere soft. You pass a monk painting a new scroll. He hums softly to himself as he works, and his brush dances, flicking lines that almost look like laughing mouths. You ask what he's painting. "A dream of honey," he says with a smile. You want to ask more, but something tells you it's best not to overthink it. You begin to see the quiet genius behind these joy scrolls. They aren't just decoration. They're strategic. Emotional counterweights. After days of walking through nightmares and wards and fiery-eyed saints, these scrolls offer something just as powerful. Relief. One scroll simply features the word "enough." Painted in soft gold. Repeated like a lullaby. You stare at it for a long time. That night, you request to sleep among the joy scrolls. The monks nod. They bring you a simple mat and a cloth. No extra parchment. No curses. Just a pillow and the sound of wind moving through gently swaying scrolls. You fall asleep to the imagined music of painted lutes. You dream you are weightless. You dream your laughter returns. You dream of a scroll that wraps around you like a warm breeze. When you wake, the monk is already beside you. He offers no words, only a small bowl of milk and honey. And you swear, it tastes like the dream. You don't know what day it is anymore. That's not a complaint. It's a quiet confession. The monastery has smoothed away the edges of time, daylight, nightfall, sleep, and wakefulness all blending into a kind of sacred fog. Even your body has adjusted. You don't crave sugar. You don't reach for your phone. You've even stopped checking your scroll the moment you wake. You already know it's there. And you already know it's listening. Today's path leads down. Not metaphorically. Literally. You descend a tight spiral staircase so narrow that the monk in front of you disappears in moments, and the echo of his sandals becomes the only thing keeping you company. When you finally emerge into a low, cool room, you're greeted not by saints or demons, but by animals. Snakes. Hyenas. Baboons. Painted, of course. But with an energy that makes you hesitate. These aren't graceful creatures of folklore. They're scrappy. Lopsided. One hyena has eyes pointing in different directions. A snake has a mustache. You're not entirely sure that's historically accurate. The monk sees your face and grins. Sometimes, monks get bored. Welcome to the margins. These scrolls aren't hung in sunlight or tucked in velvet boxes. They're shoved into alcoves, stored loosely, and, if we're being honest, look like the comic relief of the scriptorium. One features a long string of GUI characters, then abruptly ends with a doodle of a sleeping monk drooling on his scroll. Another includes a crocodile reading a book. You blink. Monks would copy texts for hours, the monk says, and they'd sneak things in. To stay awake. Or to make each other laugh. You love this. You love the idea that even in a place so devoted to sacred ritual, there's still room for whimsy. For mischief. For the tired sigh of a man who's just copied the same word 57 times and decides the only cure is to add a doodle of a goat doing cartwheels. Historians call these marginalia. Some brush them off as irrelevant. Others dig through them for cultural context, clues into daily life, hidden satire, coded messages. One scholar once claimed that a doodled snake biting its own tail next to a saint's name was actually a critique of that saint's hypocrisy. The monks don't confirm or deny. They just smile. But here's where it gets more interesting. Some of these doodles, turned powerful. You're shown a scroll where a once joke image, a hyena in a bishop's hat, was later encircled in ink and repeated. Around it, a phrase written in looping GUI. Even the unclean may guard the gate. It became a symbol of reversal. A way to use the absurd to protect. One monk explains that a laughing figure can drive away fear faster than a stern one. And so, over time, some scribbles became sacred. Humor became armor. One scroll, stained and half-burned, features a chicken standing over a lion. You laugh. Not so funny, the monk says. That chicken was drawn during a famine. It meant hope. You stop laughing. Because you understand now, these weren't just jokes. They were survival. A monk tired of painting crosses all day might draw a monkey just to remember the world still had trees, still had laughter, still had monkeys who didn't care about theology. One scroll features a sleeping monk curled like a cat, surrounded by bees. His dream, the monk says, was to rest without sting. That scroll became one of the most requested charms among beekeepers in the region. It hung beside beds, beside hives, beside apiaries where honey dripped and stingers hovered. And now, that motif is carved into headstones. Even the doodles outlive their artists. Historians still argue whether these marginalia were meaningful additions or incidental distractions. But if you've spent any time in this monastery, you know the truth is never that binary. One scroll you're handed is entirely nonsense, gibberish text, crooked symbols, a cartoon goat leaping over a candle. But the monk holds it like a relic. This, he says, was made by a novice with no training. He just wanted to help someone sleep. Did it work? Yes, he says, smiling. Very well. There's something comforting in that. You don't have to get everything right. The scroll doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to care. To try. To sit beside you through the dark and say, in its own inky way, I'm here. That night, you sleep with one of the humor scrolls. It features a fat lion trying to climb a tree, and failing. Over and over. There's even a tiny ladder someone drew beneath it, half erased. You smile as you fall asleep. And you dream of trees with ladders that always reach the top. This morning, you wake with the distinct sense that something tiny is tucked under your blanket. You lift the edge, expecting, what? A beetle? A forgotten prayer bead? Instead, it's a scroll. A very small scroll. No bigger than your finger, wrapped in thin twine, with soft creases along its edges. You unroll it carefully, expecting more cartoon animals or poetic wisdom. But this one is different. Sparse. Just a few words in careful ink, written in a spiral that leads to the center. Keep close. Keep safe. Keep sleeping. You look around your chamber. No one is there. No monk waiting to explain. But when you rise and step outside, the morning feels warm, not just in temperature, but in texture. As though you are being watched, kindly, from somewhere just beyond the doorway. Today's lesson, the monk tells you, is not about painting. It's about placement. You follow him through a narrow passage, then out into a shaded courtyard filled with potted herbs, cracked benches, and drying laundry. Several scrolls lie in the sun, rolled tight and sealed in leather tubes. Others hang from lines, stretched like laundry, except these won't be folded into drawers. They're going under pillows, the monk says. That's new. You assumed scrolls were kept sacred, framed or stored away. But in truth, many were designed to be tucked where you sleep. Worn around the neck. Hidden in head wraps. Sewn into mattress linings. Kept under the tongue in worst cases. You blink. People sleep with these? Yes, the monk replies. Where the head goes, the spirit follows. You try not to think too hard about what that implies. He shows you a simple leather amulet, cylindrical, no longer than a chopstick. Inside, a tightly coiled scroll rests, bound in goat thread. It's worn smooth from years of use, the leather darkened from body heat and time. These were given to children, he says. Especially those who had nightmares often. And adults? He nods. Especially them. You watch as another monk shows you how to roll the parchment without cracking it, slow, patient, like wrapping a message to your future self. Once rolled, it slides into its case. Then sealed. Then blessed. But the blessing isn't dramatic. There's no chant or bell. Just a soft whisper. One word, barely louder than a breath, nagus. It means, to reign. The idea being, you reign over your own sleep. Historians still argue whether these pillow scrolls had more to do with physical protection, warding off illness, spirits, insects, or psychological comfort, a tactile reminder that you're not alone. Either way, they were believed to work best when placed close to the head. Monks even tracked placement like a science, under the left side for protection, under the right for revelation. Some claimed different ink colors affected dreams differently, red for alertness, black for banishment, gold for clarity. You begin to understand just how personalized these scrolls could be. They weren't one-size-fits-all sleep charms. They were spiritual prescriptions. One elderly monk, nearly blind, shows you his own scroll necklace, threadbare, patched, but clearly loved. He calls it his second spine. He says it's carried him through 40 years of dreams. You ask if it ever failed. He shakes his head, then adds, "Not once I listened." You pause at that. What does it mean to listen to a scroll? He explains that sometimes the scroll doesn't protect you. Sometimes it reflects you. If your fear shifts, your dream changes, your scroll might hum louder. Or stop humming. Or unroll on its own. It's not supernatural, he says. It's intimacy. You're not convinced that's any less magical. That night, the monks offer you your own pillow scroll. You're allowed to pick the outer wrapping. You choose soft indigo cloth. Inside, a new parchment waits, blank. You must decide what goes into it, they tell you. No pressure. You return to the scriptorium, brush in hand, and you paint something simple. Not words. Not symbols. Just a curved line, like a sleeping figure. Then a tiny circle above it, like a moon. Then you stop. The monk takes it, nods, and rolls it carefully. It slips into a small leather tube, which he places beneath your pillow. You will know if it's working. You lie down. And for the first time in days, you sleep without dreaming. Just stillness. Quiet. Breath. When you wake, the scroll is warm. And the pillow feels heavier in the best possible way. You're starting to think the scroll has a sense of humor. This morning, it unrolls itself slightly as you wake, just enough to reveal a tiny symbol in the corner you swear wasn't there before. It looks like a bird carrying a leaf. Or maybe a spoon. It's hard to tell. But it makes you smile. A strange comfort from ink and goat skin. Today, the monks lead you not to a chamber or courtyard, but into the nearby village. Down the winding path that snakes along the ridge, through thorny brush and the occasional chicken with way too much confidence. The sun is high, the air dry, and yet everything feels soft somehow. Like nothing here dares to be sharp. Your guide explains that not all scrolls stayed within the monastery. In fact, many were made specifically for people outside its walls, villagers who brought their dreams, their fears, their stories to the monks in exchange for parchment and prayer. Sometimes, it wasn't even fear. Sometimes, it was fire. You reach a modest round house, its thatched roof trembling in the heat. Inside, an old woman sits weaving, her hands moving as if on autopilot. She looks up when you enter, smiles faintly, and points to the low wooden shelf behind her. There, in a curved ceramic dish, lies a scroll. It's charred. Not entirely destroyed, but the edges are burned, the ink in places bubbled, blackened, unreadable. You expect the woman to treat it with sorrow. But she lifts it gently and cradles it like a cat. This, she says in a quiet, steady voice, cooled my dreams. You sit across from her on a cushion that sighs beneath your weight. She begins to tell her story. Years ago, she doesn't say how many, her dreams turned violent. Every night, fire. Not metaphorical fire. Literal, licking flames. She would wake drenched in sweat, the smell of smoke caught in her throat. She tried sleeping in different rooms. Burning herbs. Staying awake. Nothing helped. She feared going to sleep. Until, one day, a monk came to visit her dying uncle. She asked him, as he left, if he could paint a scroll, not for protection, but for cooling. For peace. For water. 3 nights later, he returned with the scroll you now hold. The images were strange. Water, yes, but also hands catching falling embers. A bird with ice on its wings. A woman sleeping inside a flame-shaped bed that glowed blue, not red. That night, she dreamed of the same fire. But this time, she walked into it. And she did not burn. The next night, she slept through. The scroll sits now not under her pillow, but beside her stove, because, she says, the fire still needs watching. You hold the scroll a little longer, gently. Despite its damage, it still hums faintly. Like something not quite finished. Historians still argue whether such healing stories are anecdotal, psychological, or spiritual placebo. But in this quiet hut, with the old woman smiling as she returns to her weaving, there is no argument. Only peace. She tells you that some scrolls must change shape to work properly. A long scroll won't help someone who cannot stretch their arms. A bright scroll won't help someone afraid of light. One must adapt the scroll to the sleeper. You ask how the monk knew what to paint. She shrugs. He listened. Back at the monastery, you begin to notice more of these adapted scrolls. One rolled into a fan shape, to be placed behind the neck. Another coiled into a ring, worn like a crown. Some stitched into clothing. One particularly beautiful scroll, dyed indigo and red, was created for a deaf child, its symbols larger, bolder, more tactile. The child, now grown, is one of the monks painting scrolls today. He doesn't speak. But he paints like he's whispering to the page. You sit beside him and watch as he finishes a symbol, a spiral enclosing a single teardrop. It's not labeled. You ask what it means. He writes one word beneath it, gone. You don't ask more. Some scrolls are meant to name the thing we can't. Others are made not for protection, but remembrance. You see one painted in black and silver, with the names of 7 siblings who died in a landslide. The scroll is not meant to be read aloud. It's meant to be held while dreaming, so they are remembered while the dreamer rests. Another scroll contains no names. Just one winding line that loops like a river, never touching itself, always curving forward. Beneath it, so the journey continues. That night, you sleep near the window. You leave your scroll rolled tightly by your chest and rest your hand on the small, burned scroll the woman let you borrow for a night. You dream of fire again. But this time, it's far off. And you are cool. And there is water. And you wake with tears on your cheeks, but you are not sad. You're grateful. You've begun to carry the scroll without realizing it. Tucked into your sash. Folded into your sleeve. Sometimes just resting quietly in your palm, as you walk the corridor half awake, like a sleepwalker holding onto a thread. The monks don't mention it. They see it all the time. Scrolls, they say, like to stay near the dreamer, even during the day. Today, your guide is younger. He doesn't speak much, but he walks quickly, and you struggle to keep pace. He leads you out of the monastery altogether, down a winding path that cuts into a grove of trees. There, under an enormous fig tree, several villagers are gathered in silence. You're not told what's happening at first. You wait, sitting on a rock warmed by the sun, the fig leaves rustling above. Then, slowly, a woman approaches the group. In her arms, a bundle, small, wrapped in blue cloth, with a leather strap looping around it. It's a dream scroll. But not just any. This one has a name painted directly on the outside. You recognize the word, Malcolm, a child's name. It means, gentle. The woman unwraps the scroll and lays it out on the grass. The villagers don't read it aloud. They just sit with it. And you come to understand, this is a scroll of memory. A morning scroll. Its symbols are simple. A child's handprint, surrounded by painted birds. A line of suns, drawn in different sizes, as though charting days that were once long and warm. At the bottom, a phrase in looping script, she dreamed of lions that never bit. The monks sometimes made these scrolls for parents who lost children, not just to illness, but to famine, floods, or just the quiet mysteries that take lives without explanation. They believed that if a dream could haunt, it could also heal. This scroll wasn't made to protect sleep. It was made to let the sleeper cry. Historians still argue whether morning scrolls were a psychological innovation or simply cultural ritual. But watching the woman wrap it again, press it to her forehead, and breathe in, you know one thing for certain. It helped. Later, the young monk leads you to a smaller house tucked into the edge of the grove. Inside is a man, old, thin, quiet, who hasn't spoken in years. The locals say he lost too much to keep words. Yet at night, they say, he sings in his sleep. They believe the scroll made him do it. The scroll, stored in a woven pouch, is rarely touched. It's more artwork than amulet now, delicate from time, the colors faded but still visible. At its center, a figure with no face, holding a lantern. Around it, 3 concentric rings of script, repeating the same line. Don't speak in the dark. Sing. When the monks made it for him, they didn't know what would happen. But that very night, for the first time in a decade, the man murmured something in his sleep. Not words. A tune. A lullaby his wife used to hum before she died. And every night since, more song. You ask if he understands what he sings. The monk shrugs. Maybe the scroll does. You spend the rest of the afternoon in the grove, watching children run between trees while their parents sit nearby, some holding scrolls rolled tight in colored cloth. Others wear them around their necks in leather cases shaped like teardrops. You realize that not all dream scrolls were made in monasteries. Some were drawn in kitchens. Some painted on scraps of bark or linen by a relative who remembered how a certain symbol felt on the skin. Some of these scrolls are crooked. Off-center. Even messy. But none are discarded. Because here, to dream is to connect. And anything that helps preserve that connection, between mother and child, husband and wife, sleeper and memory, is sacred. One woman shows you a scroll she keeps not to stop dreams, but to find them. I haven't dreamed in years, she says softly. So I carry this one until they return. Her scroll is quiet. Mostly blank. Just a single star in the corner. Sometimes, emptiness is an invitation. That night, back at the monastery, the monk offers you a choice. He holds 2 scrolls. One is filled, top to bottom, with script and symbol, dense, powerful, battle-ready. The other is nearly blank. Just a line, a shape, a space. You sleep with one, he says. But choose wisely. One protects. One listens. You hesitate. Then, slowly, you reach for the blank one. Because tonight, you don't want armor. You want a witness. You sleep deeply. No images. No voices. Just the steady feeling of being watched, not with suspicion, but with care. You begin the next day differently. No assigned path. No waiting monk. Just a note, handwritten and left beneath your pillow. Come when ready. The dreams are choosing. It's not signed. But somehow, you know exactly where to go. You make your way down through the main corridor, past the scriptorium where the younger monks are already painting, past the cool kitchen where someone's grinding herbs, and out into the sunlight that washes over the cliff's outer ridge. The light is bright, but not harsh. Warm, but not overwhelming. It feels approving. You walk alone for a while, until you reach a narrow passage you hadn't seen before, carved into the rock, nearly hidden behind a stack of empty water jugs. It curves like a question mark, and of course, you follow. The chamber it leads to is different from every other. It is round, sunken, and entirely covered in hanging scrolls. Hundreds of them. No frames. No glass. No velvet ropes. Just scrolls pinned directly to the walls with small obsidian pegs. They hang like skin drying in the sun, or laundry left too long on the line. But they are not decaying. They are glowing. Not in a fantasy way. Not shimmering or pulsing. But every scroll seems to radiate presence. Like a person just left it. Like the parchment still remembers. These, a voice says softly behind you, are unclaimed. You turn to find the head scribe. You've seen him only twice before, once painting a scroll in silence, once asleep upright in a chair. He walks with a slight limp, as though one leg forgot how to age at the same speed. He gestures toward the walls. These scrolls were made by monks for sleepers who never arrived. Or who passed before the scrolls could be given. Or who never asked. But they're still alive. Waiting. You walk slowly, passing scroll after scroll. Each is different. Some are chaotic, wild with color and battle and flame. Others are so sparse you wonder if they're unfinished, but something in your chest tells you they are not. One scroll catches your eye. It's covered in spirals, faint, overlapping. There are no figures. No words. Just circles within circles, all flowing toward a small open center. What was it for, you ask? The monk shrugs. A man who forgot how to dream. Another shows an image of a boat floating in the air, sails full of stars, carrying a sleeping figure across a black sea. You move closer, squinting. It's your face. No, wait. It could be your face. The resemblance is vague, soft. But something about the jawline, the shape of the hands, you take a step back. The monk watches you carefully. Sometimes the scrolls choose before the dreamer does. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were truly prophetic, or whether people simply projected themselves into them. But here, in this sunken chamber of parchments, it's hard to doubt that something deeper is happening. Another scroll nearby holds only one word, repeated hundreds of times in black ink, "Forgive." And in the corner, a tiny painted door, just slightly ajar. You sit for a long time, surrounded by these unclaimed scrolls, wondering who they were meant for. If any were meant for you. If, in some way, all of them are. The monk tells you that sometimes villagers come here and choose one at random, and that act alone, of choosing, brings peace. Some weep when they read. Some laugh. Some say nothing and sleep for the first time in months. You're handed a small cloth pouch. Inside is a scroll without a name. Just a symbol on the front, a line that curves like a wave, then splits into two paths. It hasn't found its dreamer yet, the monk says. But maybe it'll walk with you for a while. You carry it back in your hands, not your sash. It feels heavier than the others. That night, you don't place it under your pillow. You place it beside your heart. And you dream of walking a road that splits, and splits again, until the paths become threads. You follow one. Then another. Then all at once. You're not lost. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. The next morning, the scroll still lies against your chest. You unwrap it gently, expecting change, some new mark, some smudge of ink, some whisper etched along the edge. But no. It's exactly as before, the single line splitting into two paths. Still, you feel different. You slept deeper. Not the kind of sleep that erases memory, but the kind that settles like sand after a long storm. The head scribe finds you before breakfast. Today, he says, you'll see how we end. That's not ominous at all. But you follow. He leads you far out, past the scriptorium, past the drying scrolls, past even the boundary of the monastery's grounds. A narrow footpath descends through thorns and low shrubs, toward a quiet plateau overlooking the valley. You've never been here before. And there, set into the ground like gravestones, are stone markers, each about waist high, each carved with Guizi script and a single symbol. Beside them, scrolls. Old ones. Some crumbling. Some sealed in stone boxes. Others resting beneath weather-worn glass. These, the monk says, are scrolls no longer needed. You kneel beside one. The script is barely legible. Time and dust have taken much of it. But the symbol carved into the stone beside it is clear, a closed eye. You look around. Many of the symbols repeat, eyes, hands, stars, birds. A few show an open door. One has a flame crossed with a river. They aren't graves, not exactly. They're resting places, the monk explains. For scrolls that fulfilled their purpose. You think of all the ones you've seen, those that battled sleep demons, soothed grieving mothers, protected children, brought back forgotten dreams. And here they are, laid down like old soldiers. But not all scrolls make it here. Some are burned. Some are returned to the forest. Some are buried beneath pillows forever, their messages turned inward. You ask how monks decide what happens to each one. He answers, by how the sleeper wakes. You wonder how you've been waking. If your scroll knows. If it's already deciding its ending. You're handed a scroll to carry, an old one, edges curled like dried leaves, tied in soft leather. Your task is simple, place it on the altar stone in the center of the grove. You do. Carefully. It's lighter than you expect, and yet, your hands tremble. The monk chants one line. A breeze picks up. And that's it. No thunder. No lightning. No ethereal chorus. Just release. That night, back at the monastery, the monks gather, not to mourn the scroll's retirement, but to remember its dream. The man it once belonged to had suffered from dreams of falling, every night, every sleep. Until one night, he dreamed he landed softly. He never needed the scroll again. You sit with the others, listening to soft chants. One monk plays a low flute. Another hums. Someone brings warm milk. It feels like a dream itself. You look down at your own scroll, still in your lap, and wonder, will it one day rest on that stone? Or does it have further work to do? Some scrolls, you're told, are passed on. Not all dreams are unique. Some fears echo across generations. One scroll, painted for a boy afraid of drowning, now protects his grandson. The parchment faded, yes, but the ink still speaks. Historians still argue whether scrolls like this are sacred objects or just inherited artifacts. Whether the dream's power lies in belief or repetition. But here, in this circle of warmth and candlelight, there is no argument. There is only trust. And dreams that know how to wait. One monk says, "We do not fear the end of the scroll. Only the silence if it's never made." You sleep that night with both scrolls, your own, and the old, unnamed one from the chamber of the unclaimed. You hold them close, unsure which one you belong to more. In your dream, you walk between two cliffs, scrolls hanging like vines from trees that whisper your name. You choose none. You choose both. And you wake with no fear. Only breath. It's your final day at the monastery. You feel it before anyone says it. The rhythm of the place has shifted, not slowed, not hurried, just different. As though the scrolls themselves know your time here is nearly done. You hear it in the footsteps of the monks, quieter than usual. You feel it in the weight of your own body, not tired, not tense, just aware. You're led, one last time, to the scriptorium. This time, no one paints. The benches are empty, the brush is still. Only your spot, your little corner near the window, is prepared. A scroll is laid out in front of you, blank. A fresh bowl of ink waits beside it. The brush? Yours. The one you started with. You must finish, the monk says. Finish what? He doesn't answer. So you sit. You breathe. And you begin. You don't try to copy the monk's symbols. You don't paint saints or demons or shields. You paint your own lines. A ripple, like the way your breath felt on the second night. A curl, like the scroll that opened itself one morning. A doorway, left ajar. And a path, always a path. You write one word, in the center, still. Because that's what this place has given you. Stillness. You finish the scroll not with a flourish, but with a small dot, one mark in the corner, as if to say, enough now. You roll it slowly, carefully, tucking it into the cloth pouch they prepared for you. But you don't tie it shut. Not yet. You want the scroll to breathe, even just a little. The head scribe meets you by the gate, where the cliff path descends to the valley floor. He hands you your original scroll, the one you first slept beside. It's wrapped tightly now, sealed with red string. It's done, he says. You feel something settle deep inside your ribs. Something final, and oddly joyful. A breeze picks up, tossing a few dry leaves across the stone path. Somewhere in the monastery, a bell rings once. You hadn't noticed bells before. Maybe they were always there. You sling your bag over your shoulder, scrolls carefully packed inside, and begin your descent. The land stretches wide below you. Trees sway gently in the distance. Smoke curls from a village fire. A child laughs somewhere far off, and it reaches you like a blessing. You know now that sleep isn't just a passive state. It's an act of faith. A daily return to darkness, with only symbols and ink to guard the gate. Historians still argue whether the monk scrolls were mystical, medicinal, or mere tradition. But you no longer care what they argue. You carry the proof. As you walk, the wind tugs gently at the corner of your bag. The scroll hums, soft and slow. And you smile. Because you know it's not just ink anymore. It's listening. It always was. Now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw loosen, your fingers uncurl, and your breath, whatever pace it's keeping, settle into something softer. You've walked the cliffs. You've sat with the monks. You've seen scrolls whisper, protect, weep, even laugh. You've painted in candlelight. Slept with ink close to your heart. Woken in silence that felt safe. You've learned that sleep isn't escape, it's a return. A homecoming. And the scroll? Whether real or imagined, whether parchment or simply memory, it's with you now. Not for protection, perhaps, but for presence. For that quiet, knowing hum that says, you are not alone in the dark. Let that hum settle beneath you like a woven mat. Let it hold your spine, cradle your thoughts, slow the movement behind your eyes. There's no more monastery to climb. No ink to dry. No dreams to decipher. Only rest. Only breath. And maybe, just maybe, something ancient curling softly at your side. Good night, dreamer. Sleep well.